tragic death of King Edward VI. Edward VI was born on the 12th of October 1537 and became the King of England and Ireland on the 28th of January 1547. He was only 9 years old when he became king, and he ruled until he died in 1553. Edward was the only son of King Henry VIII and his third wife, Jane Seymour. He was the first king to be raised as a Protestant. Because Edward was so young, he didn't rule the country himself. Instead, a group of advisors called a regency council made all of the decisions. His uncle, Edward Seymour, led the council first, followed by John Dudley. Edward's time as king had a lot of problems. There was an economic trouble and social unrest, which led to riots and rebellions in 1549. He was also fought a costly war with Scotland that didn't end very well, resulting in England pulling back its troops in exchange for peace. During his reign, the Church of England became more clearly Protestant, a change that Edward supported. This was a big shift because his father had kept many Catholic practices, even though he broke away from the Roman Catholic Church. When Edward was 15, he became very sick. Knowing he was dying, he made a plan for who would follow him as ruler to make sure that England stayed Protestant. He chose his cousin, Lady Jane Grey, to be the next ruler, skipping over his half-sisters Mary and Elizabeth. After Edward died, there was a dispute over who should be queen. Jane became queen but was removed by Mary 9 days later. Mary was Catholic and reversed many of Edward's changes, but Elizabeth later restored them when she became queen. In his plan for who would take after him, if he didn't have any children, Edward VI initially wanted only men from Lady Jane Grey's family to be able to become rulers. These men could be from her mother, Frances Grey, Duchess of Suffolk, or her sisters, Catherine and Mary. As his death got closer, influenced possibly by Northumberland, he changed his words to allow Jane and her sisters themselves to become rulers. However, he made it clear that he was an exception to his male-only rule, intended only for situations where there were no male heirs, and it shouldn't be a regular practice if Jane and her sisters only had daughters. In the final version of his will, Edward excluded his half-sisters Mary and Elizabeth from becoming rulers because they had been declared illegitimate by their father, Henry VIII, and were never made legitimate again. Edward took active steps to make sure his plans were followed. In early June, he worked closely with lawyers to write a clear, final version of his will, which he signed in several places. On the 15th of June, he ordered top judges from his sickbed using stern words and expressions to make his will official and planned to make it approved by Parliament. He also had leading council members and lawyers sign an agreement to follow his will after he passed away. However, when some legal experts voiced concerns about his will, Northumberland angrily threatened them. Eventually, on the 21st of June, over 100 important people, including council members and church leaders, signed Edward's will. Many later said they were pressured into signing by Northumberland, though at the time few showed any hesitation. As Edward VI's health worsened, it became well known that he was dying. Foreign diplomats noticed that plans were being made to prevent his half-sister Mary from becoming queen. France, unhappy with the idea of the Emperor's cousin taking the English throne, held secret talks with the Duke of Northumberland and showed their support for an alternative. Although most English people supported Mary, diplomats believed that Lady Jane Grey could still be successfully installed as queen. For a long time, many thought that the Duke of Northumberland alone had plotted to change the line of succession. However, since the 1970s, historians have increasingly seen King Edward himself as initiating this change and strongly pushing for it. Historians have highlighted Edward's vision of creating a Protestant kingdom, while others have emphasized that Edward, despite having some helpers, was the main force behind the move. It's also suspected that Northumberland's close associate, Sir John Gates, might have encouraged Edward to adjust his plans so that Lady Jane Grey could inherit the crown directly. Edward believed he had the ultimate authority and strongly supported removing his half-sisters from the line of succession, particularly Mary. Edward's health began to decline in January 1553 with a fever and a persistent cough. According to reports, the imperial ambassador, Edward suffered greatly during fevers, especially from breathing difficulties caused by pressure on his organs. In early April, Edward felt well enough to go outside in the park at Westminster and later moved to Greenwich. His condition seemed to improve by the 7th of May, with doctors being optimistic about his recovery. He even enjoyed watching ships on the Thames from his window. However, his health took a turn for the worse again, and by the 11th of June, it is reported that Edward was coughing up greenish yellow, black and pink substances, indicating severe lung issues. Doctors then diagnosed him with a life-threatening lung tumour. Edward's condition deteriorated rapidly, his legs swelled, and he became too weak to fight the disease. In his final moments he told the tutor, "I am glad to die." Edward VI made his last public appearance on the 1st of July, when he was seen at the window at Greenwich Palace. Those who saw him were shocked by how thin and frail that he looked, and for the next 2 days large crowds gathered, hoping to see the king again, but on the 3rd of July they were told it was too cold for him to appear. Edward passed away at the age of 15 at Greenwich Palace at 8 p.m. on the 6th of July 1553. According to the story told by John Fox, Edward's final words were, "I am faint. Lord, have mercy upon me, and take my spirit." Edward was buried in the Henry VII Lady Chapel at Westminster Abbey on the 8th of August 1553. The funeral featured reformed religious practices led by Thomas Cranmer. The procession included many children in choir robes and was witnessed by many Londoners who were crying in mourning. Edward's funeral chariot, covered in gold fabric, displayed an effigy of the young king, complete with a crown, sceptre, and the Order of the Garter. Edward's grave remained unmarked until 1966, when Christ's Hospital School placed a stone in the chapel floor with an inscription to remember their founder. The exact cause of Edward VI's death remains uncertain, although there were rumours of poisoning. There is no evidence to support this. Some believe the Duke of Northumberland, who was very unpopular, might have orchestrated such a plot, while others thought Catholics could have poisoned Edward to bring Mary to the throne. However, the surgeon who examined Edward afterwards concluded that he died of lung disease. The Venetian ambassador noted that Edward had died of consumption, now known as tuberculosis, a diagnosis accepted by many historians. It is believed that Edward's prior illnesses, like measles and smallpox, had weakened his immunity, making him more susceptible to tuberculosis. Another historian suggests his symptoms were more like those of severe pneumonia, which led to a fatal lung infection, blood poisoning, and kidney failure.